Darth Vader, when he's on the block, what's the thing he says to Luke?
Luke, I am your father.
Exactly, Erwann. So everyone remembers the line as
Luke, I am your father.
When in fact, it's
No, I am your father.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, it's one of the examples of Mandela Effect in movies.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Cut to Reveal. I'm your host Ricky, and with me as always is Piotr and Erwann. So this is going to be an episode similar to how we talked about the Kurosawa effect. And we're going to talk about another effect today, the Rashomon effect. Piotr and Erwann, have you heard of it?
I never heard about the term Rashomon Effect, but I do know what it's in reference to.
All right, well, we're going to get into it. So, the Rashomon effect is a term of storytelling and cinematic writing method used to show how a single event can be described in a variety of ways due to unreliable multiple witnesses. So, with that being said, Rashomon was a film by Akira Kurosawa in 1950, and it tells the story of four witnesses describing a murder four contradictory ways. And the reason we know about it is because in 1951 at the Venice Film Festival, it won first prize for its groundbreaking use of nonlinear storytelling, dynamic cinematography, and the unreliable narrators, basically. At this point, that had never really been done. And with this, it was just like one fell swoop that brought Japanese cinema to the forefront as well as elevated Kurosawa to basically a world level. Since then, it's influenced countless of films and books and television. So I'm pretty sure that if you're listening to this, you either have heard of Rashomon or know of this kind of storytelling premise. Fun fact, the Rashomon effect has actually transcended cinema and is commonly used in psychology and law. This is something that started with this film, the Rashomon effect. With that being said, Piotr and Erwann, have you seen Rashomon or know of any films that are similar to it?
I hadn't seen it in years and years and years. I still think the film is really interesting about what it says about memory and psychology, how who we are and how we want to be perceived by others influence our own memory. And that's very interesting because it also says a lot about Japanese society of the time and the society in general. That's why I think that Rashomon hasn't lost any meaning through the years, despite being a very old film now. It's still, I would say, an essential watch for filmmakers.
Rashomon is part of the Criterion Collection for that very reason. I hadn't seen it. I had known of it, but I hadn't seen it until preparing for this episode. And I had seen Seven Samurai before and actually owned it. So I was already familiar with Kurosawa. And I've seen a few of his other films, but not his entire catalog, which is quite extensive. I think that when you see films like that from that time in context, I think it really makes it more of an impact where you're witnessing something that like, okay, this is the first time that this has ever happened. This storytelling within cinema, it makes it that much more, like I said, impactful when you're watching like, oh shit, this still holds up. And I think it still holds up. I definitely highly recommend to watch it.
When I watched Rashomon, I don't know why, but my first thought was to compare it with 12 Angry Men, which is one of my favorite films. And it's similar era in a way. Rashomon is 1950 and 12 Angry Men is 1957, I think. So it's 7 years apart. I thought about this immediately because while we don't have a Rashomon effect in 12 Angry Men, we have people who see facts in different ways. So even though we don't have recollections of what happened, we have like interpretation of facts, and everyone interprets the facts in the way that they want it to. And there is only one guy who really wants to get to the bottom of it. Everyone else just... You know the premise of 12 Angry Men. And listener, if you haven't seen it, I don't want to spoil it for you.
Do spoil it, because if you haven't seen it yet and you're listening to that show, you definitely need to be spoiled. But it definitely makes sense because, of course, it's not the same storytelling device like to tell a story. And it goes back to what I was saying about how our values and who we are influence our own memory, our own takes on things. In the movie, 12 jurors need to decide if this kid is guilty or not to have killed his dad. And everybody is okay to say, yeah, he did it. And one guy doesn't agree and decides to change everyone's opinion. At the very end of the movie, there's still one guy says, no, he did do it and I'm not going to change my mind. And you find out at the very end of the movie that it's his own opinions and its own worldview that inform his decision and not the facts.
Yeah, his prejudice and stuff like that.
And so I think that's what links the two movies in my mind is that you can see the prejudice, as you were saying, Piotr, of these characters. And that's what makes both movies very interesting. But you don't have that groundbreaking way of telling things that we have in Rashomon.
I actually thought to myself, is it possible that like Sidney Lumet was influenced by Rashomon in some way?
Oh, for sure.
As for the Rashomon effect, it was a very influential movie at the time, and it's still now, because When you see a movie like The Last Duel from Ridley Scott, which is really good and uses that structure, first act is about how Matt Damon's character sees things. Second act is how Adam Driver's character sees things. And the third act is Judy Comer's character's point of view. And when the movie was released, all the critics were, it's a Rashomon style movie. Because it's still like very much in the mind of film scholars and critics and filmmakers. It's such an influential and groundbreaking film that it's still cited today when talking about a movie that uses that technique. I guess many people heard the term Rashomon style, but I haven't seen the movie because like Ricardo, Piotr, you hadn't seen the movie. I hadn't seen it in a very long while. And it's to show how influential it was.
To piggyback on that, like the other thing to realize with at least Rashomon style and with Rashomon, the movie, is that we never really know the truth. We just have it from these four contradictory ways. And it's the same with The Last Duel, is that we're just seeing it from a perspective. Like it's still kind of like hadn't seen we've seen the event in Rashomon, but we didn't see the event in 12 Angry Men. And we've only seen the events in like people's different perspectives, that we never know the truth of it.
Yeah. Although in 12 Angry Men, we kind of do.
I mean, that's why it makes it like Rashomon style, where we've got unreliable narrators. Like that's the biggest thing.
And by the way, like this might be interesting, but this is something that I found out. Rashomon Effect kind of feeds from what is called Mandela Effect. The effect is about like a group of people misremembering historical event or a person, right? It was because a researcher, Fiona Broom, I think, she had a memory of Mandela dying in prison in 1980s. And she had like a very vivid memory where she remembered very specific things about him dying in the prison, while in fact we know it's not true, right? It kind of feeds from that psychological phenomenon of Mandela effect. And I have one example that I wanted to test on you, okay? Listen to that. What's the thing that Darth Vader, when he's on the block, what's the thing he says to Luke?
Luke, I am your father.
Exactly, Erwann. So everyone remembers the line as, Luke, I am your father. When in fact, it's no, I am your father.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. So it's one of the examples of Mandela effect in movies.
I guess in that specific example, it was distorted through time, I would say.
Yes.
I had heard of the Mandela effect that exactly feeds the Rashomon effect, because in the short movie Twisted that I recommended to you guys, so it's a short documentary about an event that took place in the United States near the release of the movie Twister. There was a showing in a drive-in of the movie, and during that showing, a real-life Twister came in and just destroyed the whole theater. And everybody talked about it in the press, like, crazy, an actual Twister destroyed a showing of the movie Twister. Everybody was like, yeah, it was crazy, I lived through it. But when you ask the people who actually work in the theater at the time, they say, no, that didn't happen.
Yeah, because they were cut out of power, right, before they even started showing the films.
People are actually adamant about it. I was there. I've seen it. And it was, no, it never happened. What's also funny about the Rashomon effect, they are linked, in my mind at least, Rashomon Effect and Mandela Effect. I'm a big fan of the TV show The X-Files, right? Because I grew up in the 90s. For those who don't know, it's two FBI agents who are working cases about paranormal phenomenons. They're actually in the series 2 episodes, one like based on the Rashomon Effect, and in one episode called Bad Blood, Mulder and Scully give their own view on what happened on a certain case, a vampire case. And so you have Mulder's point of view, how he sees the world, and that very much reflects because it's a comedy episode. So like there's a guy during the episode who hits on Scully, Mulder's coworker, and in his point of view, the guy has very huge teeth and a very thick accent, so he looks ridiculous. When it's Scully's point of view, it's Luke Wilson, Owen's Wilson brother, and he looks great, and he's just extremely nice and extremely professional. So that shows, like, that's very funny because that really emphasizes their own worldview and how they see also each other. And sometimes the story differs too, and sometimes they're not together, so you can see the case in a very different way. And there's an episode about Mandela Effect. It's in the later season. Mulder remembers that there was an episode of The Twilight Zone about, let's say, a vampire. He's adamant about it. No, I've seen it. And suddenly, like, Mulder and Scully are contacted by a guy who says, I used to be part of your team. I used to be an investigator. I've been with you since the very beginning of the X-Files. And then they show scenes from the very first episode, and he's in there. They actually rotoscope the guy into the very first episode, and he's with them, and they're like, yeah, you forgot. It's like, and he says that the Mandela Effect is actually a government conspiracy. I think it was the first Rashomon style thing that I've seen, like the episode of the X-Files. And as we were saying about the Mandela effect, the very first time I was aware of that.
Have you had examples of where you're not sure about your memory anymore? Because I haven't. There are situations where I'm like, did this actually happen? Or did I like...
I can remember I don't know if this is even relevant to editing or storytelling or whatever, but I remember being young enough and I remember being in diapers and waking up and it was the winter. But I remember waking up and being scared and going into the kitchen because that's where people would enter in the house. They would come in from the back. And people coming home, and it was like not my parents. It wasn't like people that I had ever seen before, but it wasn't people. It was like it was like characters from for lack of a better term, like a Sesame Street or something weird like that. And it's like very vivid in my memory. And I don't remember. I remember waking up being scared and seeing them. But then after that, like nothing. I think it was like my parents came home from snowmobiling or something and they came back. And when they came in, they were still wearing like their helmets and like goggles and stuff. So and me being small just warped it into something else. And with that, to take it back to the Rashomon effect, like the Rashomon effect is different in the sense that the memory that we're misremembering is specifically like, well, I'm a good person, so this terrible event that I'm seeing, I'm going to cast it in the light of me being the hero of the story. Whereas this memory that I'm recalling is like, has nothing to do with that. I mean, at a time when I was too young to even remember. It just shows how memory is very, very powerful. Especially with Rashomon, the setting of it was like 11th century Japan. And so there was great upheaval within that century. And so the groundwork of that was like a great civil upheaval where then everything was kind of like when you watch the film, listener, they're at a gate, which is the Rashomon gate, which leads into Kyoto City, and it's completely destroyed. So it's like a changing of the guard, or there's something great upheaval within that time period. So you get these extreme swings of human personality. You know, the characters within this are, like you said, like a woman, a bandit, a samurai, and just like a regular townsperson, and then a woodcutter. So they all have different perspectives because of their station within life. And so that influences their perspective in general. But then when you also are factoring in like great times of upheaval, then that also influences it as well, which gives you more of like a perspective of panic and maybe unsafety, or, you know, trying to make it so that, like I said before, like that you're the hero of that story. Like in any perspective, you're always going to be the hero. As much as it is about memory within Rashomon, it's also about truth. Like that's a big part of it. Like there's a monk. He was just another witness that had like known or whatever, but
he had seen a day before the woman and the samurai alive.
But he was also like, he was struggling with, I don't want to say the divinity of man, but, you know, man and truth. And like, this isn't hell that we're living on. Like, the truth is very, very important. And there's a towns guy who's basically listening to them after the trial and being like, fuck you. Like, oh, you know, every man for themselves. Like, it doesn't fucking matter. Like, he's the one that's like, well, this doesn't sound different. And years, you know, basically kind of almost is like the straight man who's like, well, that doesn't sound right. Okay, what's your story now? And then, you know, he's almost in a way like our proxy, you know, somewhat. But yeah, but at the same time, he's still a character within it. And he's kind of like, every man for themselves, you know, it doesn't matter. Truth doesn't make a difference when I'm hungry. It's like, whatever.
But you were talking about that we don't know the truth. I do think that when the woodcutter says, okay, I lied, I was actually there the whole time, it kind of says like, it take a very external point of view because he's not in the event, he's like just looking at it. And what makes it kind of the truth is that kind of sums up the movie, because we're talking about people defending their honor. And when we have that woodcutter take on what actually happened, you can see that when the thief and the samurai are fighting, it looks ridiculous. Before it was like...
They were both brave.
Exactly, both really brave. And now it's just like two schoolboys fighting each other.
Yeah, exactly. They both don't want to die. Like you can see that they are afraid for their lives.
That's why I think that you could see it as the truth, especially since it's the latest take on the story. And that brings me back also to The Last Duel. When you see the movie, every chapter of every point of view is the truth of such character. And when it goes to the female character, it's the truth of, and it fades. But first, the name of the character fades, and you only see for like a second or two the truth. It implies that the female character is the actual truth of what happened.
Even though it's not like actually said, it's not explained, but on subconscious level, it leaves you this information. Yeah.
Is there any other movie that you guys have seen that uses the Rashomon effect?
The one that pops into my mind that I didn't really think of until now was American Psycho.
Is there a conflicting point of view?
I have, but is there exactly?
So American Psycho is a movie based off of a book called American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. Probably what really brought Christian Bale as an adult actor to the forefront. So if you read the book or are familiar with the film, it's basically set in the 80s, and it's a satire about how everything was very the same. Like there's a scene in the beginning where you've got like 5 dudes who are basically all dressed the same with the same hairstyle, showing off their cards. In the book, like it's basically everybody has the exact same card and the exact same font, but it's described as like, oh my God, this person's got a description, a different description of white, a different description of like the color of the type, but it's all the same. It's just black and white. And so there's no explanation of why Patrick Bateman, who the protagonist of this film, is essentially a serial killer. And he doesn't really do anything. He works at this company and he's just like, whatever. And he's just kind of like living and we're watching him as he goes through and he's killing people and whatever. But there comes a point at the end of the film, spoiler alert, where he tells somebody, I killed this person. And the person is like, you couldn't have, because I was with that person just yesterday. I was with them in France or whatever, like on a whatever. So whoever, which is like, okay, this person has become unreliable because we don't know if it's happened or if he's just delusional or whatever.
There is some resemblance with Rashomon Effect. Yeah, I get it now.
I mean, the Rashomon Effect is unreliable. It's a perspective. Like we don't know. He could be killing all these people, but we don't know. And especially within that film, like you don't see any of the gore.
Yeah, but I understand why you would cite it. But to me, it's a storytelling style, the Rashomon effect. It's really like contradicting point of views.
I mean, that popped into my head as an unreliable narrator. So get off my back, Erwann. God.
Do you know that there's actually a remake of the Rashomon movie, an American remake from 1964?
No.
Whoa.
It's called The Outrage, and it's starring Paul Newman, and it's a Western. Yeah, the setting is different, but the story is the same. But I didn't know there was a remake. I guess it's not that famous. And I was looking through the list of movies that do use the Rashomon effect. There's Zhang Yimou's Hero, starring Jet Li. Courage Under Fire with Denzel Washington, that I've seen. Gone Girl also uses the Rashomon effect, because you have like the guy's point of view and then the female point of view on how things happened.
And I guess that's what we could end with, that like we all lie. Like that's the fact. Like even if you think you're telling the truth, you're just telling your version of the truth. And I think it's important when you're editing and when you're writing, I think it's important to think about this sometimes, because like it's very rarely that someone will give you an accurate version of what happened. An accurate version would be a boring version so often, right? So we made up stuff and we add to it and we create details that were in there and stuff like that.
Exactly. It's being an editor. When you're telling a story about yourself, who you are actually like cutting out the bad stuff because you want to present yourself in the best way possible, as they're doing in Rashomon. They want to present the best story to show them in the best light, because they don't want to be convicted, of course. And we are doing that every day when we're telling a story about ourselves. We don't, at least like normal people, don't want to present themselves in too much of a bad light. So we're cutting out the bad stuff and we're trying to present the story in the best way possible. And we want to get people involved and to be entertained by the story. So it's all about editing, guys.
There you go, bringing it back.
It's a beautiful way to end this episode.
All right, and that's it for this episode, dear listener. So as always, we want to hear from you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So you can reach out to us by email at podcast@cuttothepoint.com. We'd love to hear your voices, so you can leave a voicemail with us at speakpipe.com/CTR. And then our social media is Instagram at Cut to Reveal. We also have a YouTube channel where you can also sometimes see us as we talk shit, and that is at Cut to Reveal. And then, a lot of these streaming places that we have, you can also like and subscribe. If you can leave a review, that would be great. But also, just tell a friend. We want you to let other people know that we're out there and stuff, because that would be really, really helpful also. So with that being said, we hope you have a great day. So take care.